Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Fiber Broadband Association webinar, Making the Most of BEAD Opportunities, Tips for Success for States and ISPs, presented by Vetro. I'm Trish Ehlers, Vice President of Membership, Industry Affairs, and Operations for FBA. Last week, FBA hosted our second sold out Regional Fiber Connect show in Oklahoma City with a special focus on tribal broadband. We've received rave reviews on the event, so don't delay in registering for the third of our Regional Fiber Connect event workshops. This one will be held in Austin, Texas at the AT&T Hotel and Conference Center on May 16th. You can expect a full day of education and events, including an expo floor, with plenty of opportunities for networking and education. Registration is open now, so please register as soon as possible and be sure to reserve your hotel room as well, as our room block closes soon. You can find out more about this event and other events scheduled for 2023 on the FBA website under the Events tab and the Regional Fiber Connect page. Now on to some housekeeping details. All attendees are in listen mode only. If you have a question, you can submit it in the questions box in the control panel on the right side of your screen at any time during our presentation today. We'll have time at the end for a Q&A session with our panelists. Today's webinar will be available on FBA's website for members only under the Events/Webinars tab within 24 to 48 hours. Also, don't forget Tuesday, April 19th at 10 a.m. Eastern for Fiber for Breakfast, unlicensed wireless, suitable for closing the digital divide. This one's with Larry Thompson, Chief Executive Officer of Vantage Point Solutions, as he discusses a recent white paper that highlights the limitations of unlicensed wireless as they relate to investment from public funds such as BEAD. And now on to today's webinar. States are planning to invest unprecedented federal funding to help build broadband infrastructure. The next big wave of federal funding has begun to flow from the NTIA in the form of the Broadband Equity, Access, and Deployment, or BEAD program. The BEAD program, a cornerstone of the Internet for All agenda, represents $42.45 billion of the overall spend and a significant opportunity for states to help their citizens by working with subrecipients who will plan, build, and operate new, mostly fiber networks across America. While the BEAD program is necessary and welcomed, it presents challenges for state broadband offices. The Notice of Funding Opportunity, or NOFO, has set clear requirements that state the need to meet to use the BEAD grants. Similarly, while representing a rich source of funding for network expansion, the program requirements can seem daunting to ISPs, cooperatives, and public-private partnerships that are expected to lead the growth. In today's webinar, our esteemed panel will explore the BEAD NOFO and share tips on how to navigate the requirement while making the most of funding opportunities. I'd like to introduce our panelists today, a very distinguished group of industry veterans. In the interest of time, I've shortened their bios slightly, but more information can be found on our website under this webinar. Our moderator today is Brian Mefford. Welcome, Brian, the Vice President of Broadband Strategy with Vetro. He joined Vetro with a wealth of experience helping to shape federal and state broadband programs and leading community broadband efforts in rural areas. Prior to Vetro, Brian founded Connected Nation, a nonprofit focused on enriching community broadband access. He's working with government leaders at all levels to advance innovation, providing testimony regularly for state legislatures and the U.S. Congress, and consulting with federal agencies and the State Department. Our first panelist is Chad Rupe. Chad is the General Manager for Ponderosa Communications in O'Neills, California. Ponderosa serves over 10,000 homes and businesses in rural communities from the Southern California desert to the Central California High Sierra. Prior to joining Ponderosa, Chad directed the state of Montana's broadband program and also served as the Rural Utilities Service Administrator for the USDA. Our next panelist, Peggy Schaffer, is the visionary leader who retired last year as Executive Director of the Connect Maine Authority. She is currently a part-time strategic advisor for Vetro, focusing on supporting state broadband offices. Prior to retirement, Peggy was the Executive Director of the Connect Me Authority, Maine's program to expand broadband to underserved areas of the state. Our final panelist today is Jeff Sobotka, the new Vice President, Government at the Vivacity Infrastructure Group. Congratulations, Jeff. In this role, he will oversee the government and municipalities sector activities at Vivacity, focusing on the fiber, wireless, and hybrid broadband infrastructure needs of America's underserved communities. Before his current position, he was Arizona's first state broadband director at the Arizona Commerce Authority and oversaw the strategic development of the Arizona Broadband Statewide Middle Mile Strategic Plan. Welcome to everyone. As I said, a very esteemed panel. And now I'll turn it over to Brian for our webinar today. So if you'll give me just a second, I will give you the controls, Brian.
First, thanks to each of our panelists for joining. It's an esteemed group, and I was just thinking before, it's neat that each of the four of us have been the leads of various state broadband offices, and we have kind of coming at this content today through the lens of community and economic development, as well as having worked several of us on multiple sides of the equation, either at the community level, the state level, and federal level, and also the carrier, the private sector commercial ISP space too. So without further ado, we want to jump in here and just very briefly, won't belabor this point, but I do want you to know who we are at Vetro as sponsors of the session today. Vetro has been around for a while, since 2017, with customers around the world, focused primarily in North America. But our core product is and has been a fiber management system that's a radically simple approach, provides a radically simple approach for carriers, engineering firms, anybody who's building fiber networks to enable them to do their job more efficiently, more effectively, transparently, as a system of record for all of the work that they're doing. Building off of that base, that core product, a couple years ago, as the federal government was deciding to invest heavily in broadband, we realized there would be a need for a product focused on the public sector. And so we developed a product specifically for state broadband offices. We call it the Broadband Intelligence Platform. And that's a system of record for states as well. So where all data can come in and can be managed and tracked, analyzed and tracked. Projects can be assessed. Projects can be evaluated relative to cost modeling that we provide through partners at CostQuest Associates, and then projects can be tracked. So with those two sort of pillars of our product base, we believe we are this place where states and carriers and communities can really come together around a single source of truth, a single system of record. And so this webinar today gives us an opportunity to sort of showcase that with different friends and partners at the table. Trish mentioned this. You're here because of this big number. I think the most significant thing, or the thing I'll say that's most significant relative to this conversation today, is this represents dollars that's going to states. That is new money for broadband. I was working in the BTOP era, the last broadband stimulus, if you will. We were excited about $7 billion. That was unprecedented from a public sector spend at that time. This amount of money has states creating, and in many cases, new broadband offices where their budget, their grant budget, will be $1 billion in some cases, and so this is a lot of work that is going on at the state level to create offices, to staff offices, to create strategy to respond to requirements from the federal government, so that they can be good stewards of that investment money that's coming down the pike. This is sort of a good metaphorical picture, but also relevant as an adjacent sort of sector. If you think about what all has had to go into the construction of a highway system like this, looks like this may be in California, I'm not sure, but it's never a straight path in massive projects of this magnitude. You can imagine, and all of the parties that are involved in the planning, the design, the permitting, the community engagement. That's at scale across the country. That is really what we're looking at now in terms of broadband projects, network expansion everywhere across the country, with the ultimate objective to connect everybody. But that journey always begins with one step, and so this may be a representation of how some of you feel right now, maybe at a decision point, or maybe just trying to figure out where these roads go and which one you're supposed to take. And I think that's the crux of what we'll be talking about today, with the bottom line being that states and network builders need this common view of the information, the data that's available, the process required to navigate to projects that are funded, that are built, that are connecting citizens, and what those objectives ultimately are. So this is the last slide, where I just want to lay out again, restate that these are the main things that we want to cover. Understanding requirements of the BEAD NOFO that NTIA has published, and where we are in the process relative to those requirements. How we might leverage data together to make informed decisions across the ecosystem, all the different stakeholders and constituents that are involved in these projects being built, and how states and ISPs can collaborate, how we can prepare to navigate the state-led challenge process. We probably won't have time to get deep in this today, but it's something that we want to address and talk about and have on your radar. And then ultimately, how we track and report and share information about projects. So that's the gist of it. I do want to just give you the opportunity to snap this this QR code, if you don't mind. You won't fill this out now. It leads to a survey that will ask if you want more information, and we appreciate you providing feedback in advance. And I'll flip this up at the end of the presentation as well. So, without further ado, let me stop sharing my screen so we can get to the important part here. Panelists, thank you for indulging the preamble there. But couldn't be more excited to have you all with us today. Peggy, we're going to start with you. We have hundreds of attendees here with us today. They come from across the spectrum of, we have city leaders, we have county leaders, we have state leaders, we have ISPs that range from literally from tier 1 down to some of the smaller ISPs in the country, and also electric cooperatives. We have tribal nation leaders. So let's do some sort of a level set. What are states? Let's talk about what states are doing right now, what kind of timelines they're on, what's driving their behavior, their activities today, and then we'll kind of go around the horn. Chad, maybe to speak to the ISP version of that, and Jeff to the community version. Again, each of you have led state offices, so feel free to comment across the board, but we'll start with Peggy. Thank you.
Yes, so there's been a lot of talk about the BEAD money, and all of it is sort of get ready. But the money's probably not really going to be available until 2024, and here's why. Because the first big things the state have to do is a 5-year plan, how to use that money, and also the digital equity money. Now, most states are going to combine those plans, So it's going to be important as you go forward to create those partnerships between your ISP and the community you want to serve around digital equity. But that's the big thing. And if you follow any states at all, anywhere, you'll see that they are crisscrossing the state right now, literally crisscrossing the state. Every state office, all of their staff are all over the state. And what they're doing is they're gathering thoughts and ideas and inputs, and so they can craft a 5-year plan about how this money is going to flow and what the ultimate outcome is going to be based on what their state needs. That's going to take some time. Most of these plans are due in August-ish. And with that plan comes also the what's called it's the first round of funding, which is guaranteed, I believe, to be about $100 million per state. Now, then once the states get that funding, they still have to put together a grant application, and then they have to publish that grant application, take applications, make decisions on it, which is one of the reasons that I think that the money probably is not going to hit the streets until next year, which means right now your job is to think about what your company and your state and your community need for broadband, and be part of that community planning process, be part of that state planning process. Give your thoughts about what the grants should look like, how to include digital equity, begin to build the partnerships that are going to be required for this money. But it really is the time now to really, you have time to breathe and plan and focus and be part of this planning process, right? Don't like sit on the sidelines. They are, like I said, states are everywhere. So go talk to them, go to their meetings, talk to the people in your community. But now is the time really to begin to help your state shape exactly what this grant process is going to look like and what's going to be about.
Perfect. Thank you, Peggy. Chad, maybe pick that up and take from an ISP perspective. I think it's also worth noting that we're talking about BEAD and money that will flow in 2024 most likely. There are folks out there that are saying, well, I'm reading press releases and I'm hearing about other projects already being funded. Well, it's worth saying, the states are still largely spending money that's been coming to them through COVID relief funds, through the ARPA funds, through the capital projects funds that Treasury released. But Chad, maybe fill us in on what ISPs are doing in this context.
Sure. First of all, every ISP is different because we all serve different types of communities, and we have different factors that enter into our business decisions on how we serve our communities. As a ILEC, and an incumbent local exchange carrier for both voice and data, as well as a CLEC, if you will, for the more competitive piece, those things factor into our decisions. We're focused in on serving our incumbent communities and expanding it as opportunities provide themselves and as we see a good business fit and a good business model. So we look at the overall operational sustainability. And I think that John Barrasso told me one great thing when I was back in Wyoming, and he said, be very careful of unexpected consequences of good intentions. There's a lot of states that are creating rules based off of ARPA or based off of BEAD. And you got to be really careful of make sure those don't conflict, because it makes it really hard as a provider to go in and say, hey, we're going to make a good business decision and go in and serve this unserved community or upgrade facilities in an underserved area when we've got conflicting regulations from a public utility commission or a state broadband office or state legislators that are out there trying to put their own fingerprints on something. And when they put their own fingerprints on something, sometimes that fingerprint leaves a mark that they didn't intend to leave. And it creates an issue where it makes it impossible for us to make a good business decision. And so most businesses, when they have uncertainty, tend to be more cautious and step back. So, that's one of the things that we try to be very diligent in who we're partnering with, whether it be a community or, an entity of any kind, vendor, whoever it is. We try to exercise some due diligence because we want to make sure that we're getting into agreement with the right partner and understand that what the true desired outcome is of the end user. You know, this is a ton of money that's going out the door, and you got to look at what success looks like, and you got to look at what failure looks like. And more than likely, we're going to fall in between those two. As a nation, we will. We're on a 5-year clock, so we got to factor all those things into our construction timelines. We've already got construction plans set moving forward for the next few years. So, you know, what does it look like 2 to 3 years from now on our construction builds and our partners with engineering firms and the technology that we're trying to deliver and the communities that we're trying to serve and what's currently being built out there right now. So, you know, this isn't all done in a vacuum. This is being done as you're, you know, we're building it as we're flying it, as they say. And you know, the one thing that I would recommend for everybody nationwide is form your relationships with your states, because every state is in a different phase of implementation, and those relationships are key. But be very cognizant of what people are trying to put their fingerprints out into these different efforts, because it will directly impact the success and the desired end state of what everybody's trying to get to.
Yeah. Thanks, Chad. Well said. Jeff, turning to you, maybe if you can represent the community view, what can and what can cities, counties, communities be doing today, or what are they doing that's making a difference?
So one of the things that was mentioned earlier was the state broadband directors traveling around the state. If the state broadband director gets to your community and you don't already have a broadband group formed, you're behind. And what you have to do is you have to look at your community and look at all aspects. What we did in Arizona is we formed what's called Broadband Action Teams, or BATs. This was a great idea I stole from Russ, who was the broadband director in Wyoming at the time. And what we found was that probably the model was a little town called Yuma, Arizona, border of Arizona, California, and Mexico, a huge agriculture area. You know, 90% of the lettuce in the country in the wintertime comes out of Yuma. So obviously that's a big part of their industry. There's also a Marine base there, an Army base there. It's a border town. So there's some really unique situations there. So when we formed the Broadband Action Team, it wasn't just the folks from the Chamber of Commerce and the folks from the local government. I mean, we had county, city, we had people from Homeland Security, we had agriculture interests, we had all these different groups at the table. And inevitably, they all want broadband, but they want broadband in different ways and in different formats. Getting those discussions ahead of time, so when the state or NTIA or the FCC comes to your community, you can speak with one voice, I think is really important. So organizing, finding a champion. In the case of Yuma, we had some great champions. In other counties, a county supervisor, a county manager are great people to have. It could be a municipal CIO, it could be your mayor. Whoever has interest and passion, get them involved and get them out front and get some skin in the game. Because ultimately this becomes a political question at some level, and you're going to need that little push. So form your team, find a champion. Those are the two things I would recommend to communities.
Very nice. Yeah, great insights there all around. Thanks to each of you. Thanks, Jeff. Peggy, circling back to you, let's dig into some detail now, particularly around how states, entities can work with providers and various partners. So I want to use the story, the backdrop of your work in Maine. Specifically, last year, I think last February, it was announced that the NTIA was awarding $277 million through the Broadband Infrastructure Program. It was, I think, your state with your leadership won about $28 million for last mile connections, roughly, and maybe that was sort of an early test, early indicator of what this BEAD process, how it's going to unfold nationwide. If you will, kind of take us through that story. How were you so successful in that, and what did it look like behind the scenes? Tell us a little bit about the sausage making.
So the first thing I think was an understanding of what the NOFO said, right? That was critical. Just like this one, you have to know what that says. Like, they're very long, but do read them. And the other thing is that there's lots of questions. The NTIA has posted a lot of frequently asked questions, read all that stuff, right? Because it gives you insight into what they're doing. For that particular NOFO, they were asking for unserved, for this project to serve unserved areas within a census block. So we had to take census blocks and essentially deconstruct them to figure out what were the unserved locations within those census blocks, and then create projects out of that. So we did an RFI, and we got about 5 or 6 projects. But at the time, I knew that the maximum grant was 30 million, and I figured I wanted all of it. All of that 30 million. So we were just working with Vetro to set up this broadband intelligence platform. And with them, we went back in and looked at our state to figure out what areas met the NOFO requirements, which is going to be just as important this time, right? The NTIA has already said that the FCC data about who is served and who is unserved is not the endpoint for states when they develop their broadband strategy. So the states are going to be able to add additional information about who is served and who is unserved that the FCC is not currently represented in the FCC maps, meaning speed testing, meaning what I refer to as pole driving, where communities go out and look what's on the poles. All of that kind of information, the state's going to be able to combine. But the important thing is that really has to be located in a spot, right, where you can look at it, the state can look at it, and you can then, in this particular case, we went back out after we looked at the areas that were most likely to be successful. We went back out to providers and asked specifically about areas. We said, we have about $15 million that we would like to apply for that we don't have projects for. Here are areas within your footprint that would fit. What do you think? And we had providers come back. We had a couple of providers come back with bigger areas, with different areas. But that piece about, again, this grant process is slightly different, but the idea of knowing what was eligible for this process, for that NTIA process, and knowing what the requirements of that NTIA process were, we were able to then expand our grant, and we're going to serve, I think that when that project's done, it's going to serve well over 15,000 people in 7 distinct project areas, and there are, I think it's 5 different providers. So a little bit like what's going to happen with these grants, right? A bunch of projects are going to come in from different people, but the data that the states have is going to have to be really important, and you're going to need to be knowledgeable about that data. It's going to have to be easy to use, and it's going to have to be easy to use because this is a lot more money across your entire network, across your entire. Everybody on the staff should be able to look at this data and figure out how to use it. And that's going to be a key piece, as well as sort of, there's going to be a challenge process here. And as a state director, and I'm sure Chad and Jeff will tell you the same thing, when you have a challenge process, it's important that the state be the source of truth for that challenge, because otherwise you have somebody saying, I serve that area, and somebody saying, no, they don't. And the states need to be able to identify who in fact does serve that process, that area. And that really needs to be done right down to the location level. It isn't just the census block who serves who in a census block. Now with the new broadband, the FCC data, you're able to look at locations. But that's a really important piece, because it's vital that you, A, serve everybody that you can with the money, and B, know every location that is served or isn't served, and that the state is the owner of that truth.
Brian, I'll add something to that too. I really think it's important for the state to be able to, frankly, call BS on people that submitted reports, because we've seen where providers have claimed to provide 100 symmetrical service in areas at specific locations, and then they completely don't even have anything there to provide that service, but they do it to prevent competition. And that is really a detrimental impact for eligibility for these funds, because claiming to provide service and then not being able to provide service are very harsh consequences for everybody involved, and it'll end up leaving money on the table. And so I think that, you know, you've got to have somebody that is the truth teller and is willing to say BS when somebody submits something simply to prevent competition.
That's great, Chad. And you know, that's part of our function with providing the broadband intelligence platform, is to provide that platform of record where multiple data sets can come in. To Peggy's point, like the starting point now is the BDC, the FCC data. But the state has the opportunity, and Peggy, I actually want to come back to you on the quote unquote challenge, because I want to make sure we don't gloss over that. But states can now add data. They can add speed test data. They can add E911 data. They're expected, the NTIA is expecting them to engage citizens and community leaders for feedback on those maps and those location eligibilities. But Peggy, for those who are in this space, we've all sort of been swimming in a version of the challenge, and that has meant states and providers challenging the FCC data that was submitted several months back. That's really a distinct and separate challenge process from what is going to be ongoing that states are going to have to manage. Can you speak a little bit more to that?
So there's actually the next step is in the 5-year plan. The states have to provide a structure for a challenge for communities, for providers, for others to actually challenge the locations that the state says is served or unserved. So that's like that's going to be part of like the first process of identifying what areas are eligible for the BEAD money. And then when they go to actually putting out grants, there will be an additional challenge process based on what areas people are proposing to serve. And so states really need to be prepared with good data. And to some extent, that goes back to the partnerships they need to build with their providers, right? Because many states have requirements that providers provide them information as well as what the FCC does. Now, some of them are just FCC data, but others are more strict about what kind of information the states can provide. And a lot of times that's in statute, right? So you know, I know Texas has in statute if a provider doesn't give data to the state, they're not eligible for a grant. So providers need to be aware of that kind of activity, right? Of that kind of requirement, because they'll find themselves quickly ineligible for a grant if they don't share their data. But at the same time, it's really important. It's really important that one of the other things that we did in Maine was that we actually provided a Vetro instance to communities, so they could use it to develop their own plans and their own strategies and look at their own data. And then that helped us inform really on the ground what actually was happening in those communities. And so there's lots of sources for truth. The states need to sort all that out, but there will be two processes that are slightly different from each other in terms of this BEAD money. The first one will be when the first plan gets put in, and the second one will be when they begin to do grants. So, you know, that is, you know, the other thing is that this states it's really helpful to not only know exactly where people are going to build, where you have awarded the money, and that's just not BEAD money, that's Capital Projects Fund money, that's USDA money, that's ARPA money, all of where RDOF funds are, all of that needs to be part of your data that you're looking at when you determine what areas are served. And going forward, because there's going to be multiple rounds of this money, right? States are going to be doing, it's not all going to go out in one round of grants. It's going to be multiple rounds of grants. So it's going to be important for states to not only know where they have served, what has been served with federal money, but also what projects came in that you were unable to serve, and to try to figure out how to get to that next area and how to make that grant that came in that you didn't award better, so that area can get awarded next time.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you, Peggy. Jeff, Peggy mentioned community partnership in those remarks, and I want to turn to you for a focus there for a moment. And we have a question from Jim Mercanti. Sorry, Jim, if I'm getting your last name mispronouncing that, but basically saying, you know, much of what you're recommending so far requires a lot of organization, staffing, funds at a community and local level. And we hear this quite often. Like, there's this expectation that the bar is set high for states and ISPs to engage communities. Now that's a broad term, community engagement, and that manifests itself in various ways. But can you speak to that requirement for one? But then, what are the different ways that a community can expect to quote unquote partner with carriers, with ISPs, and they're being in some cases overwhelmed by a lot of inbound too, right? So they've got to sort through, to use Chad's words, the BS that maybe it's great stuff that's coming in, but they've got to sort through it. So let me just turn that question over to you. What are the different ways that they can expect to partner with providers?
So, you know, I think everyone has to take a step back, and we have to think about the fact that we're all trying to get to the same objective. You had mentioned staffing and funding and everything else, and I will tell you the broadband action team that I mentioned earlier, and every other one was made up of nobody who's getting paid for this. You know, in many cases, it just requires it requires in many counties cases, use of a conference room, use of technology in some cases, but you have to start at that real grassroots level. I'm not a huge fan of top-down solutions for communities. I believe that working together and determining really what the community wants, and then moving forward, you know, not just with the state, but with ISPs and others that are going to come, is an important part of ensuring that you get exactly what you want. You know, as you go to the more rural communities in this country, you know, you find a lot of them really have gotten a raw deal on the first few rounds of telecom. I think it was Peggy or Chad mentioned one of the older programs that absolutely poured good money after bad, and they've been burned before. So I think it's important that communities approach this. As I mentioned earlier, try to come up with as much as possible one voice. Try to come up with an organization structure, and it doesn't have to be run by the top guy at the county. I mean, quite frankly, in many cases, they don't have the time to run this type of organization. We have one county in southern Arizona, Pima County, and their group down there was headed up by the head of the county library, who's gone on to much bigger and better things, and now she's going to be running the digital equity program here in Arizona. So I think that having individuals step up is important. Organizing around some common needs. You know, when you start talking about rural areas, middle mile is a huge issue. You know, getting connectivity to the county, understanding exactly what you have, I think is really important. And I'll let Brian speak to the features of Vitra's products, but one thing that the way I view Vitro is a common language that the ISPs, the state, and you know, ultimately the folks at NTIA can look at and communicate effectively. You know, coming up with these tools that you have in your tool belt, so you're all working. But I am a big believer that the counties and the cities in particular do need to seize control of this process. You know, people don't want to hear this, but the reality is that this is government money that's being spent, and I think it's important that it is spent in the public interest, and I think it's important that you ask for and negotiate for specifically what you want. You know, you're going to have folks coming in inbound saying we would like to do this, that, and the other thing, and that's great, but you're going to have a lot of those folks as long as the government's picking up the initial tab. So it's important to operate from that position. You know, the other side of the coin, I think that ISPs and others that would like to have this business do have to put themselves in the shoes of the community itself. I'm a big believer in getting in my truck and spending time in these communities. If you have folks that have never been to your community before that are coming in with a great solution, that's a red flag. Go out and spend some time in the community, talk to the people, understand really what the issues are. The issues that you look at from a 10,000-foot view aren't always the case once you get out there. And it also gives you the ability to go back and validate assumptions that you've had to come up with better solutions. So again, my position that this is a collaborative process. I think Peggy mentioned earlier, this is not going to happen overnight. Many folks look at this like a sprint. I look at it more like a triathlon. There's going to be multiple events. There's going to be a lot of training, and the folks that stick to the plan are going to be the ones that are successful. I hate to say this out loud, but there are going to be winners and losers in this process. So if you care about your community, it's important that you get involved now. And if there isn't an organization, form one and go out and make it happen. This is a once in a generation opportunity. This is no different than rural electrification or the building the interstate highway system. So form your organization, get backing, and get the tools necessary to make an effective case, because I can guarantee you the folks that are coming to your community have their own sets of tools.
Thank you, Jeff. And Chad, turning back to you for some operator perspective. I'm going to try to consolidate 2 or 3 different questions we've gotten from the audience. And by the way, keep those coming in there. We've got our set questions, but we're more than happy to turn to audience questions. So there's a sense that while we had hoped the BDC data would be kind of the last word on eligibility, and now that it sounds like states are running parallel processes on data, that's going to make it even more challenging for providers, and especially smaller providers. It's going to prolong the process. I think there's truth in all of those. I will, before I turn it to you for reaction, Chad, I'll mention that I was involved in a county broadband project just a couple years ago, where we had good data. We had the single source of truth that the county was able to say, here's what we view as unserved. Well, it was a larger carrier that came in and said, no, that's wrong. Most of these houses are already served, by us or another incumbent. But it was a smaller electric co-op that said, well, actually, these are our members, and here's data that we have that show that they are not currently served. And so that, for me, was sort of a microcosm of what states are going to be able to do, is really take ground truth from a variety of sources, overlay all of this, and get a strong sense of what is actually happening on the ground. But the ISP perspective, Chad, you're a general manager for an ISP that serves rural areas. You're dealing with this on a daily basis.
Yeah, thanks. I think that a couple things is one, you need to have really strong, good data as a carrier. You got to know where your reality is at the location level. You cannot depend on any one source of funding. Everybody's all thrilled about all the grant money and it's wonderful stuff, but there's value in it and there's lack of value in getting so-called free money, because there's also the operational sustainability and the operational support that comes in from USF on some of these things on a long-term basis. And so from an incumbent standpoint, you have to look at that and say, okay, what's the value of the grant money? What's the lack of value? And so a good offense is the best defense. So you say, okay, well, maybe we're not going to wait for the grant money. Maybe we're just going to go ahead and go after some loan money through maybe RUS or somebody else, and or invest some of our own capital into this build and get ahead of this process, so that we don't have somebody coming in and trying to overbuild us to make sure that we're ahead of the game. And you can't have a mentality of, hey, we're just going to build it and they're all going to come. You've got to have a good ground game in marketing, and not everybody has the same needs. It's not all just residential service. There's going to be ones that are business that want active Ethernet. There's some that are going to be wanting high speed, greater than gigabit service PON type of service. There's some that they're vacation homes, and they may or may not ever have a full utilization. And you may never be able to make the business sustainable by offering fiber to the prem in remote areas where you have people that are there on weekends during the summer. You have to be able to account all of those things. But if you simply have the mentality of, hey, we're just going to chase the free grant money and hell be damned, or torpedoes be damned, you're going to fail. That's just the reality, whether you're a community looking at it, and if you don't partner up with the people that know how to build these things, know how to sustain them, you're going to set yourself up for failure with those unexpected consequences. Everybody thinks that, hey, we're just going to build it and everybody's going to subscribe and it's going to be wonderful and it's great and we're going to advance. That's not the case. Not everybody simply wants the same thing, and you have to know what you're dealing with, and it starts with good source data. And if you can't have your own good source data to begin with, you've got some issues there. And having those relationships at the community level, at the county level, at the state level, and frankly at the federal level is important. And having good partners along the way, whether they're vendors, engineers, construction supply chain type of things, those things all matter, because those are the things that are going to impact your build schedules and make sure that you're successful. So that, I know that's a lot in a very short period of time, but there's a lot to this, and it's not as simple as people would like it to appear to be.
It's also important that this grant money is not free money, right? There's, again, read the NOFO. There is a lot of requirements, not only on the state, but on what was called the sub-grantees, people who are going to get and so it's really important, as Chad points out, when you go down this path, know what's on the path, right? Because there's a lot of reporting. Most of this money will be reimbursement. It's not upfront money. And you're going to need to meet environmental requirements. You're going to need to be able to track your network that you built for probably at least 10 years. There is going to be requirements around low-income programs. There's going to be requirements around middle-income programs. There's going to be requirements around digital equity. All of that is spelled out in the NOFO. So, and it's like all right there. So go in with your eyes wide open and know what you're getting into. Certainly your states can help you with that. But it's really important that you understand the impact of all of that on your decisions of what kind of service you're going to bring to your community.
Peggy, you mentioned tracking the assets, and there's a question related to that from the audience that is basically saying that our states are asking, are states really equipped to be able to audit ISP networks for the next 10 to 20 years? Maybe speak to that. Maybe we'll go around the horn on that.
They're going to have to be equipped, right? That's part of the funding that the NTIA includes administrative support, and that's one of sort of those support pieces. A platform like Vetro can help them do that kind of work, but you will have to assure the feds that that network is up and running for the next 10 years. And so part of a state strategy right now is not just putting together a 5-year plan and figuring out what their grants are going to look like. It is, in fact, looking deeper beyond when the grants get awarded and then the press release goes out, to the amount of work and the amount of tracking that they need to do once these projects start to get built. Because this is not, the feds they're not just giving out this money. They want a return on it, and they want accountability for it. And it's going to be very important for the states to have some kind of system that can allow them to do that kind of work, because you're going to need to not only know where the grants are going to go, you need to be transparent on how this money got spent, and you need to be able to track the results.
That's great. And Chad, would you agree with that? I mean, as a provider, you're called upon to provide data. I know you guys maintain a system of record, so maybe speak to the potential benefits of the state and providers being able to cooperate more or communicate more efficiently with that data.
I think that there's a couple things there. The flexibility in the state reporting system is very important. What you often get, what I've seen, is that oftentimes people will come out who wouldn't be able to tell a phone booth from a cabinet, and they're the ones who are inspecting what's going on. So RUS has general field reps. They have auditors. If you're dealing with an RUS borrower, they're going to be used to these things. And so for a state to try to build that internally and provide that expertise is hard. So my point is how do you gain expertise quickly? You gain it by outsourcing it, or you partner with it. So accepting reports from other federal partners who are in the business of doing this and have people trained to go out and do it is I think, a valuable asset that a state should bring to the table. But if you don't, then don't pretend, don't fake it. The providers, we see through that. I guarantee you. When somebody shows up and they can't tell the cabinet from a telephone booth, it's a good indicator you probably don't have somebody that you're dealing with here who's well experienced in the space. So, the states have to think through that piece quite a bit and make sure that they've got the right people at the table to partner with.
Yeah, well said. We've got about 6 minutes left here. I want to switch gears a little bit. It was brought up earlier, but not in detail. Middle mile, work on middle mile networks. Jeff, you led an effort, was $100 million kind of range of effort on middle mile strategy in Arizona. Talk to us about the significance of that project and why it matters across the country.
Well, Arizona, like many of the Western states, the majority of the land, 81% of the land, is owned by the government. So when you're going from A to B, you're crossing multiple jurisdictions, be it federal and state. Getting middle mile built is tough, and a lot of the middle mile, quite frankly, is just Phoenix to LA sort of thing, where they just want to go ahead and take large amounts of internet traffic from the, maybe what we call the hyperscalers, the very large, the Googles, the Amazons, the Microsofts. What we did was we built a fiber network owned by the state that allowed you to connect every mile. So every city, town, cell phone tower, digital billboard was within a mile of that fiber. It was open access. And it gave these communities that lifeline to get back to the data centers in Phoenix to get out over the larger internet. I think that middle mile, it's tough because that's not really focused on in BEAD. And we really made a conscientious effort to get that done. With ARPA and CARES and other funding because of this. I mean, I can only imagine what Peggy has to deal with in Maine with islands. How do you do your middle mile there? And that's a different animal. So, every state is different, but I think the Western states in particular have a tough time with this. We've had some great partners in the past, and I think that there are a lot of carriers that do this quite well. I mean, one of the things that we do at Vivacity is that we don't own the asset. We allow the county or the city or the state to own it. And I think it's important because it gives them some skin in the game and some degree of, I guess ownership would be a bad word, without having the operational stress. And Chad had mentioned, there are some folks that probably should not be in the broadband business. That being said, there's a lot of middle mile grants that are going to get funded here. My understanding is that the NTIA grant was chronically oversubscribed, and I'm hoping that there'll be a second bite at the apple for a lot of people for that. Because as you increase fiber capacity or wireless capacity to the home, you're going to need additional backhaul requirements. You're going to need redundancy that you don't have today. And I'm hoping that in future NTIA programs that this is something that's addressed, because it is a chronic program in the rural parts of most of our states.
Peggy, Chad, anything either of you would add to that?
No, I mean, I think middle mile is always, people forget about it because it's not the sexy thing, which is bringing service to somebody's house. But what I always say to people is it's an internet. You got to get connected to it. Just you have to get, and middle mile is how you run vast amounts of data and vast amounts of capacity to areas. We have a Maine in our BTOP in 2012 built what we call the 3-ring binder, and it's about a 5 petabyte line that runs all the way around the state, and it has enabled all kinds of activity that we could never have done before. And that the open access nature of that has meant that instead of everybody running wires, everybody can access this one big fat wire.
Brian, I was going to mention about middle mile is it's really difficult to get middle mile information from carriers. And as a former AT&T AT&T employee, I get it. You know, there are things like Homeland Security that quite frankly, they don't want to talk about. But having accurate representations of where the middle mile fiber is essential. If you don't know that and you're out applying for grants in these communities, you're going to have a tough time because there's going to be a choke point, and the worst thing you want to do is give somebody something and it doesn't work. Yep. So, you know, from our perspective, that's something where the research needs to be done, the money needs to be spent. There's plenty of money for this sort of thing. Yep. As we mentioned earlier, take advantage of the tools that are available. You know, Vetro's got a great pool for this sort of thing, and make a good decision, because this is something that's going to impact your community for the next 30 years.
Pay attention to how much you're paying for your data on backhaul transport. That's key. I mean, that's the sustainability issues that need to be dealt with. Even if you do have access, you need to know what you're paying and what you're paying for.
Well said. By the way, the Vetro as a company, the precursor company actually was the builder of the original fiber locator tool. And I've used that example, that reference with some states to say, you know, think about as you're funding middle mile, the ability to create sort of your own version of an accurate fiber locator, and really knowing where your middle mile, where your transport fiber network is, and not just today and tomorrow, but, you know, 10 years down the road, when you have an economic development prospect that wants to move to a rural part of the state, you know, you should be able to tell them what kind of fiber capacity they can access there with clicks, not, you know, weeks of calls. We're we're approaching the top of the hour, so I want to invite Trish to come back online. But while she's doing that, what have we missed that you guys think we need to convey to the audience today? Anything I haven't asked, or that you just think is super important?
I would reinforce the importance of all these conversations, right? So know if you're a community, understand what your incumbent provider is willing and is able to do. Understand what they can't do that maybe you can help them with. If you are unserved in a community, start a broadband action team. And we call them something different in Maine, but start a broadband action team so that you can show an interested provider that there's interest in your community. There is a take rate. They're going to be able to not just get a grant, but able to make the operations work. So all of those things are what people should be working on now, right? And you know, quite frankly, somebody asked a question about resources. The states do have planning money, and they do have operations money. You know, in Maine, we have provided, I think it's 13 grants to 13 different county community support, and that they need to actually get this work done.
You know, Brian, one thing I was going to mention is that understand that the state broadband directors are under a tremendous amount of pressure right now. I remember during the pandemic, the director of public health used to have her press conferences in our building, and she looked like she, you know, you see pictures how the president ages over the course. I think they're all going through that right now. So cut them a little slack. They're working really hard. They're doing the best they can to call people back, but just know that the quantity of emails and the complexity of what they're working on is nuts right now.
And they need good tools. You need good tools, and that's what the administrative money is for, is to buy good tools.
Excellent.
Invest. I think Jeff said that recently. Invest. Use the money and invest it well.
Wonderful.
Panelists, thank you so much. Trish, over to you.
Of course. I want to thank Vetro for sponsoring this webinar. I want to thank all of our panelists. I know I learned a lot today, and I really appreciate you coming on and talking to our audience. If your question did not get answered, we will make sure that someone from the team gets back to you on that question. We just had more coming in than we could handle today. Just a reminder to join us for Fiber for Breakfast next week, and we'd love to see y'all in Austin, y'all. But thanks everyone. Have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you on our next webinar. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.